Hi, I'm Judy Mudd, and this is my second video on watercolor brushes. In the first video, I discussed these three brushes, which are all synthetic. The round has a good point, but they all three have a spring to them. They have a little stiffness to them. They give you a little bit more control, and they're less expensive than, say, Sable brushes. So this would be my starter set, something like this, maybe a little wider flat, maybe a little larger round, but as long as it has a good point, then you can use it like a number 2, and so I would go with something like these. The next set of brushes, if I was going to expand my brushes, would be something like these. I have a couple of rounds here. These are Sable. I believe these other two, this one's Squirrel, and I believe this one is Squirrel too. And they are all soft. The reason you might need softness, and I'll show you these rounds real quick. I use these very similarly to that I use my round synthetic brushes. However, because they are soft, I usually wait and use these toward the end of my painting. If I was going to glaze over areas of a painting, such as something like this, I don't want to disturb the paint that's already down. So I would take a softer brush, something like this that's Sable, that's very soft, and I would use it to lightly glaze areas that I wanted to add color to, and it won't disturb the paint underneath. So that's why I reserve these toward an end of a painting, so that my painting that is already down on the paper does not get disturbed by the brush. Obviously these are a lot more expensive than the synthetics, but they are well worth it. Again, I'd like a full belly so it can hold lots of paint, and also a nice sharp point. And I'll show you quickly how this looks. Again, you want to put the paper down on the side of the brush, paint down on the side of the brush, and squeeze it so that you have that watery effect. And you can see it's a lot looser than, say, the synthetic. I have less control with this one, but maybe if you're a very tight painter and you want to loosen up, maybe it's time to buy a Sable brush, and it might help you become more loose in your painting. This brush is a Squirrel mop, and it holds lots and lots and lots of water and paint. You can see the sizes, and this is what it looks like when it's not wet. So if you go into a store and you see one kind of bushy like this, chances are once it's wet it will look like this one. They now make a nice synthetic squirrel, so you might look for one of those instead, and I think they're pretty soft also. So what's nice about these is because they do hold, and you can do all kinds of things with them. Once they're wet, you can see how flimsy they are. So again, you don't have much control, very similar to the Sable on that. But sometimes you don't want a lot of control. Sometimes all you want to do is apply water to a sky where you have clouds in between, and so all you really want is something that's like this, that you can just apply a quick, wet application of paint. And that's all the control you really want. You don't want much more than that. It's really nice to get down a large amount of water very quickly too. Let's see what we have here. It's very nice to be able to put that down without a lot of streaks. Very smooth. And so you have this nice, soft, smooth brush, and that's what does it. The third brush is what they call a dagger. And I don't use this a whole lot, but it is nice for certain things. And you can see they come in a variety of sizes. These are also called striper or striping brushes. I understand that they were once used to put striping on the sides of cars. So that's what they were initially used for. Again, they're soft. You don't have a lot of control with them. This wider one is nice, especially if you are a floral painter. in that it can make, let me get plenty of paint on it, it can make some nice leaf shapes. Twist it and twist it back. So if you happen to do a lot of florals or want to do a lot of florals, that might be a brush you want to look for. Just kind of twist it and it creates that little look. It's also good for, say, putting on tree limbs if you're doing a lot and you are wanting to have that kind of irregular shapes. Since you don't have a lot of control, it does help you become more loose in those brush strokes. Something like that. The smaller one is nice for putting in, say small twigs, even tiny, and you can barely see that, I know, tiny twigs and grasses. Again, with very little control, but it does make some nice little shapes with that. So those three brushes, a Sable, so that you can lay down glazes without disturbing the paint underneath, a mop like this, a squirrel mop, where you can put in lots of loose passages of water and paint and have it look spontaneous, and then maybe a dagger, especially if you're doing some florals, a lot of florals, or a lot of landscapes, you might want something like that, or even maybe the sails. Now this one, because it doesn't give you as much control, you can see that it's a lot less controlled than, say, this one, which is the rigger that I showed you the first video. See, much more controlled, but at the same time, those brush strokes are much more stiff looking than, say, the one that's with a soft brush. One last thing I wanted to show you, and that, well, actually I have two things I want to show you. The lifting brushes that I showed you last time, I wanted to show you that they do come in a round. This is a number 2 round, and a really small flat, which is a 0. And the flat, and particularly the little round the flat, is great for cleaning up passages, things that you want to remove or softening edges. Like this tree can look a lot more realistic if it has a few soft edges in there. So this brush is nice for doing those kinds of things too. Last but not least, try to find things that are not necessarily meant for watercolor. Some things are very difficult to do with a brush stroke itself. It still looks like a brush stroke. If you're trying to get some things to not look like a brush stroke and look more natural looking, then maybe something like this is just a piece of chipped wood. It's really nice for creating those twigs out in a field. Same way with this little tree branch or tree twig. It works similarly, but it also has kind of a blunt end to it, so sometimes it's a little bit bigger than those. And the last thing is this. This is just well, actually I got this at reenactment where they were showing some old-fashioned pins, and so this is nice. Not only is it nice for putting down frisket, because you can clean it right off, and you can have really small things with frisket, but it's also good to scratch in some shapes that you really couldn't get with a tiny brush. It would still look like a brush stroke. Every now and then you need something like that, whether it's the side of a barn or twigs or maybe some fence posts darkening, or just every now and then I'll find that I wish I had something like this. So think outside the box. Don't necessarily go grab for your brush. Go outside, pick up a little tree twig, chip a piece of wood. Anything like that can apply paint, and it'll give you your paintings another dimension. I hope that helps, and I appreciate you watching. Thanks.